lived in New Mexico my entire lifetime and never moved. As a result of living in the center of the Southwest, I've heard the story of Lallona multiple times and in many different versions. I live very close to about 2 rivers, and when I was little, I heard a version of the story where she drowned her children in the river that I could easily walk to. I never thought I would pay much attention, nevertheless see her, hear her, and slightly see, but recently, all that changed. I have 3 friends that are brother and sister to each other. It was summer of 2008 and we were having a sleepover. We had been planning this for about a month, and earlier in the day, we had bought all the food and other snacks we could imagine. We had planned to fire up the grill and make s'mores at about 8 p.m. and just sit outside and have a good time. At every sleepover we have, it seems that the Halloween decorations seem to get taken out of the closet a lot. 8 p.m. came around and we made s'mores in the front yard. It was fun, seeing as I was the first, second, third, and last to set mine on fire. We walked around barefoot in the driveway for a bit. I set the skull on the wall of our patio. After a bit, we sat in front of the door, talking silently. During a small moment of silence and nothing to say, we heard a moan come from up the hill. It sounded outside and very close, but still far away. We ran inside, and in the haste, I nearly got shut out. We were all accounted for, and we ran into my room. When we heard it, it seemed like it was coming our way fast. We all believed it was Lallona, but we shook it off as one of my neighbors trying to scare us. The 2 streets we lived on had ex-criminals and people with mental disorders everywhere. I eventually noticed that it didn't have the plastic skull with me. About 2 or so hours later, I walked through the dark hallway, switching on as many lights as possible right when I was in my entryway. I looked out the narrow window next to the front door. I saw what looked like a misty shape of a person hovering there. It kind of looked like a woman, but I couldn't tell very easily. It was all very light. I didn't stay to find out. I turned tail and ran back to my room. Right before I got to running half of the 2 feet into the hallway, I looked down a bit and saw my plastic skull right next to the door. I'm still not sure if that really was Lallona, but one of the friends at the sleepover, the older sister, had heard once before, and the moaning sounded just the same, and she heard her. The other sister with us was hearing bells for the rest of the night. This story goes way back before I was born. My uncle told us the story on one Christmas day, when I was like 7 years old. He told us that when he and his work friends went to a bar to relax after a hard day at work, he saw the scariest thing in his entire life. When he got near to the ravine, he saw a lady in white weeping and crying looking down, standing at the edge of the ravine. So he said, "Are you okay? Be careful, you're going to fall." But no words came out of her. My uncle described her. He said she was wearing a long white dress and she had no feet, actually floating in the air. He could only see her back. After a few seconds, my uncle felt really bad and he started backing up. Her weeping became louder and louder. Then she turned around and my uncle screamed. Her face was indiscernible, and she had horse legs. She was part human and part animal. After that, he never walked home alone at midnight around the ravine. He said that, at night, he could hear her weeping soft in the air, and he still gets the chills down his spine. People say that when you hear the weeping lady far, far away, she is right outside your house or near you, and when you hear her really close and loud, it's because she is far away. My mom is a first-generation American. Her parents moved from Mexico to El Paso, Texas, before she was born. The supernatural was very prevalent in both sides of her family. My grandfather claims that we are descended from the Apache warlord Victorio, and that the spirit of Victorio appeared to him and his brothers when he was a young man. My mom had many experiences with ghosts and spirits, but she said that none was more terrifying than her experience with Lallona. Her family lived in a decent-sized house on the banks of a canal on the south side of El Paso. At the time, the family had 3 dogs. My mom describes all of them as the toughest dogs in the block. One night in the dead of winter, my grandfather was telling my mom one of his great stories when there was a loud commotion in the front yard where the dogs were. The dogs were barking to wake the dead. My mom and her dad went outside into the front to see what was going on. They were joined by my grandmother. They had not noticed this before, but a fog was slowly creeping around the street. The air was chill, but different from the cold of winter. The cold went down to the very bone. The 3 dogs were barking towards the fog, or more accurately towards the canal that was by the house. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night air. My mom described it as the most terrifying cry she has ever heard in her entire life. She says that it lasted for a full minute before finally dissipating. When the scream left, the fog lifted and the dogs returned to the way they were before. My mom asked her dad what the scream was, but all he said was Lallona and told her to go back to bed. Naturally, she couldn't sleep and instead listened to her parents debate over whether or not to call the cops and report her murder or something. In the morning, when it was light out, my grandfather went down to the canal but unsurprisingly found nothing. When he came back, he told my mom the legend of the woman who drowned her own children and is now fated to cry out for them on the banks of the river where she killed them. And to this day, my mom is convinced that she heard Lallona on that night so many years ago. Another close associate of mine who has had a close encounter with Lallona is my former karate instructor and confirmation class teacher. He is Irish and a devout Catholic, but firmly believes in the existence of ghosts and the paranormal. When he was a teenager, he lived in New Mexico, close to the borders with Texas and Mexico. Like any good teenager looking for a rush, he liked to ride around with his brothers after dark and watch for ghosts in the old graveyards. One night, he and his brothers managed to convince a couple of girls they were sweet on to come along. They were sitting in the car in the middle of the desert when a deep fog started setting in. They were unsettled and decided to leave, but the car wouldn't start. Suddenly, he says that everything went completely and utterly pitch black. My friend flipped, but his brothers were frozen in their seats, unable to move a muscle. He yelled, but they still didn't move. He reached over and managed to finally start the car. He was 15 and didn't even have a license, but he drove out of there like a bat out of hell. When his heart finally stopped racing, he stopped the car. He turned to his brother and asked him what the hell happened back there. His brother, with his face still white, asked him incredulously, "Jim, did you not see her?" He shook his head no and asked his brother what he was talking about. His brother told him that when everything had gone black, a strange translucent white woman appeared outside of the car. She looked like a wicked witch. She reached her hand into the car, through the closed window for Jim's neck, but stopped and drew back when she touched it. She then disappeared, and that was when the car started. Jim reached up to his neck and fingered the St. Michael medal he always wore. He firmly believed that the archangel responsible for defeating Satan protected him on that night. Whatever the spirit was, a demon, Lallona, or some other frightful specter does not matter. Jim is firmly convinced that it was Lallona and that she was stopped from whatever evil she intended, and he never stops praying to St. Michael. Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm a mother of 4 children, but when this happened, I only had 2. My oldest was 5, my youngest was just a baby. When my second child was about 4 months old, we lived in a trailer park across the street from an open field in Sodus Point, New York. It was supposedly a battlefield in the War of 1812. One night, around midnight, he woke up crying. I heard someone or something singing, or rather chanting to him. It sounded so weird. I couldn't understand her, but she kept singing until he went back to sleep. This proceeded to happen every time he woke up in the middle of the night, up until the night before we moved. Needless to say, he slept with me every night. I was really scared that something would happen to him. I never figured out what it was. Some people tell me it was the ghost of a slave, and other people say it might have been the ghost of a nurse. Yet, other people said it could be the ghost of Lallona. She threw her children into the water and drowned them and was condemned to walk the earth until she finds her children. She supposedly steals babies in the night trying to make up for the children she murdered. It still scares me. It was the weekend after Thanksgiving, Saturday, around 3 a.m. 2011. My sister and I were watching movies on Netflix, enjoying our days off due to the holiday. Everyone was sleeping because, after all, it is very early in the morning. All of a sudden, we began to hear a moaning or crying coming from a woman. It was very loud and it was terrifying. It sounded ugly, like a woman in pain or despair. It went on for about 20 seconds, then it stopped for 10 to 15 seconds. Then it began again, even louder. Told my sister to grab the phone to be ready to call the police because I thought a woman was being raped or being assaulted near our house. I stepped outside, scared, to see if I could prevent a crime. Shouldn't have done that, could have been dangerous. When I got to the front of the house, there was no one outside, yet the crying was literally in front of me. It was a foggy night as well. My sister came out, and the crying lasted for about 2 minutes. We were puzzled. We looked at each other, and we both got chills. We were both thinking the same thing. I don't want to come to any conclusions. I'm Hispanic and grew up with the legend of Lallona. Many people in the Hispanic community swear that that malevolent spirit does exist, and even say they have heard the cries in their native countries and in Southern California.